The Doctor has made many enemies over the course of his long travels, and he's also made many friends. And now, those two groups are going to clash when a good man goes to war. First, we find Team TARDIS honing in on a distress signal, but it leads them to a strange place. Not some spaceship, but rather a pirate ship out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. No wind, blackest night, and the crew is under siege. And we finally meet the pirate captain Avery, whose treasure was under threat of theft way back in the Hartnell era in the lost serial The Smugglers, which hopefully one day will be animated so we can properly enjoy it, but for now we get telesnaps and audio recordings. But as for Avery himself, he and his crew are besieged by some sort of wraith, a siren. But the weird thing is, it only comes for them when they're wounded or sick. It sings after coming out of the water. The singing turns them kind of loopy, and then one touch, they disintegrate. And in comes Team TARDIS to exacerbate the situation. Now Avery, he's being very cautious, so he orders all of them thrown overboard, but Amy manages to get a hold of a sword, all the weapons having been locked up to mitigate the possibility of injury, and manages to hold her own against some of the pirates, even wounding one of them and accidentally wounding Rory. And this is when we find out what happens to anyone who gets touched by the siren song. They get a black spot on their hand, much like the pirate's death sentence from Treasure Island. And we see that disintegration by siren is very, very, very frightening to look at. After a while, Avery decides to tenuously trust the Doctor and his friends to try and help the situation. But unfortunately, the TARDIS is useless, even though Avery seems to inexplicably recognize some of the mechanisms as similar to the wheel on his ship and the navigational equipment. The Doctor ends up accidentally setting the TARDIS off without his control. So they're trapped on a boat with very few supplies and a siren whom the Doctor eventually realizes can come through any reflective surface. Still water, both in the belly of the ship and out in the ocean. Glass, metal, polished. And it goes for the wounded and the sick. And while Rory and a few of the pirates are able to resist for a while, eventually we get another monkey wrench thrown into the situation. It seems Avery's son, after his mom passed away from fever, he stowed away to try and find his father. And when told that his dad is actually a pirate, not a proper naval man, he's aghast and infuriated, because he thought that his dad was an honorable naval sailor. Now, technically, there are honorable people in the Navy, back then and today, but back then, usually the Navy would get warm bodies by shanghaiing them, getting them drunk or drugged or knocked out and forcing them aboard ship, basically to work as slaves. And resistance was always met with a very harsh punishment. Beatings, mutilations. It was not fun to be part of the Royal Navy back then. So a lot of sailors turned pirate because you could potentially end up working as a privateer. That would be a pirate for hire. And it was a lot more civilized and democratic. The captain only pulled rank when he had to in a battle situation, but overall, pirates treated each other with a lot more respect than naval officers treated their enlisted men, or forcibly enlisted men. Unfortunately, the doctor finds out that the kid not only has a cough, but he's also got typhoid fever, which could be cured easily today with a course of antibiotics, maybe a hospital stay if it's severe enough. But back then, in the golden age of piracy, kid was doomed. And things get worse when a storm kicks up and Rory gets knocked overboard. But the doctor realizes something. The siren could be used to save him from drowning. So, once they figure out exactly how the siren functions, they let it loose, and it saves Rory. And eventually, after the kid gets taken as well, and the rest of the crew get taken, the captain, the doctor, and Amy decide to just prick their fingers and go to where the siren has taken everyone. Because they're not dead, it turns out. This is where my tongue stops working. They get taken to the same place where the pirate ship is, only it's out of phase. Turns out the pirate ship and a spaceship with a long dead crew that fell ill from Earth germs, War of the World style, are existing in the same spot, but out of phase with each other. And the siren is actually a medical program who failed to save its crew, but is able to help any wounded or sick that come its way. And the reason the legend about this siren mentioned attacking treasure ships, it's because reflective surfaces, like treasure, are what the siren uses to transport itself. And also, treasure is behind Avery's descent into piracy, and why, when the doctor throws all the shiny overboard, Avery refuses to part with this one piece before his son gets taken. But when it comes to his son, he's a little more willing to sacrifice what he thought he wanted. Eventually, the surviving crew, the kid and Rory, are found. It's revealed the kid can't leave the ship, otherwise he'll succumb to typhoid fever. Although once the Doctor finds the TARDIS safe and sound in the phased ship, why he can't just pop back to the 21st century, get some cure, and come back with it, I don't know. Maybe it'll cause space bats to show up. Who knows? But Rory's case is a little more complicated. He was at the point of death from drowning when the siren got him. And before he's taken off life support, he instructs Amy to use CPR on him. And at first it doesn't work, but after a tense moment, it does. And Amy also manages to turn off the holographic physician by using her handprint to sign a consent form. So Rory is her responsibility now. Meanwhile, Avery, his son, and his crew all decide to stay aboard the spaceship. It's surprisingly easy for Avery and his son to pilot. And they even get to see the Sirius star system up close, because they were talking about it earlier. So, Team TARDIS has made another mark on history and saved the day. After that, they get a message from another Time Lord. It's a stasis cube. And yes, the stasis cubes go back to the Troughton era, the end of that era specifically. Only this one is a message from a Time Lord known as the Corsair, known for having a tattoo for every regeneration, much like the third Doctor had a tattoo on his regeneration. Unfortunately, the message leads them outside of our reality into a pocket reality that's slowly collapsing. And so the Doctor has to burn up spare TARDIS rooms that we've never seen in order to get enough fuel to get to where they're going. And they land on a dwarf planetoid where 4 people currently exist. 2 odd humanoids called Uncle and Auntie, an Ood named Nephew, and a woman named Idris, whom Auntie and Uncle poisoned because she's going to get a new soul. And just in time, because when the TARDIS lands, it goes dark, as if the Matrix itself was sucked out. Turns out said Matrix was put into the woman Idris, and for the first time ever, the Doctor can talk to his wife. No, not River Song, rather the TARDIS, the good old Type 40 that has been with him through thick and thin. At first she's a little erratic, mentioning past and future events, asking whether or not fish have fingers, biting the Doctor after kissing him, and eventually admitting that she wanted to see the universe, so she stole a Time Lord, and off they went. Eventually it's revealed that the planet on which they're standing is an entity called House. No, not Hugh Laurie. Was it Hugh Laurie? The guy who played one of the henchmen on the 101 Dalmatians live-action movie. Anyway. Turns out House has been using stasis cubes of other Time Lords to lure current Time Lords and their TARDISes out to it, to consume them, and using bits of said Time Lords to patch up any injuries sustained by tortured pets, auntie and uncle. Yeah, it turns out the Corsair is long dead, and his tattooed arm makes up a part of Auntie's body. Meanwhile, Uncle got a few of the internal bits. Yeah. House speaks softly, but he's clearly a monster. On the same level as that devil that the 10th Doctor fought. But when informed that the Doctor's TARDIS is the last, instead of simply consuming it, it possesses the TARDIS and takes off for our reality, leaving the Doctor and Idris alone, because it took nephew with it, and poor auntie and uncle, having served their purpose as House's playthings, quietly die. And after a bit of back and forth between the Doctor and Ms. TARDIS, mentioning that there's a sign on her door saying pull to open, and he always pushes the door, neglecting the fact that the pull to open refers to the little door with the phone attached to it, not the whole door. And the fact that she didn't take him where he wanted to go, but she took him where he needed to go, which is very, very true if you look back on all the past episodes. And they really bond, and the Doctor laments that they can't talk face to face all the time. And Miss TARDIS admits that the body she's inhabiting is failing fast. So they've got to cobble together a TARDIS control room and power it up using Idris's spark. Well, the spark in Idris's body. Miss TARDIS's spark, I mean. To try and get aboard the actual TARDIS. Meanwhile, Amy and Rory have ended up taking the place of Auntie and Uncle as House's tortured playthings. He manipulates the inner tunnels of the TARDIS, which we finally get to see. Makes Amy think Rory has been separated from her for multiple lengths of time. He makes her think he's dead. Or House makes Amy think Rory's dead. He alters her perception so she's blind, effectively. And then he sicks nephew on them. And nephew is an Ood with a translator orb, which can be used as a weapon. So their chances of success, or of survival I should say, are slim to nil. But luckily, the TARDIS, the actual TARDIS, is able to direct Amy and Rory to the old 9/10 console room, which the TARDIS archived. One of 30, actually, past and future. And with a special thought code, they're able to get in, lower the shields of the TARDIS, and the Doctor and said TARDIS materialize in, sadly dispersing poor nephew, another Ood the Doctor failed to save. Then, after Idris's body collapses and the TARDIS gives Rory a weird message about the only water in the forest being a river. Weird. The Doctor, the clever Time Lord that he is, tells House that he doesn't have enough power to get through the divide between the now vanishing planetoid and our reality. He's got to delete rooms in order to get the oomph he needs. So, after breaking his promise not to hurt them anymore, House decides to delete the room where our heroes currently reside. Of course, the Doctor failed to mention that anyone inside a deleted room ends up right into the main console room. So when Idris dies finally, the TARDIS Matrix is able to get back into its proper place, violently destroying House in the process. And before they have to say their last goodbyes, because the TARDIS can never speak to the Doctor with a mouth again, she's finally able to tell him a word that she's been trying to articulate this whole adventure. She is alive. And cue the feels. And so, back in our reality, the last Time Lord, the last TARDIS, and their companions float off to the next adventure. This time, we end up in an old monastery that's been converted into a 22nd century acid factory. Apparently, somehow acid's being produced beneath the factory. Or should I say beneath the monastery, and it's being pumped to the mainland by the military. And in order to safely collect the material, the military have their personnel using flesh avatars. Basically a programmable biomatter which can effectively clone a person. And they can possess that body using special harnesses. And when a flesh avatar gets destroyed, they just switch to a new one, while the previous one is disintegrated or chucked. But there have been some odd things happening with flesh avatars. They call them gangers or doppelgangers. Sometimes a flesh ganger would activate on its own accord and kill its operator, in which case it has to be forcibly decommissioned, probably with a gun. And just as Team TARDIS lands and starts investigating what's going on, a solar flare hits, causing four gangers to suddenly develop self-awareness. They believe wholeheartedly that they are their operators. But they're also terrified because standard procedure is to dispose of gangers that have gone off the leash. And frightened humans are not very safe. It becomes an us versus them situation very, very quickly. This one mousy girl, her avatar becomes extremely militant, almost to the point of savagery. Whereas, oddly, the avatar of the leader of the operation, another woman, who also accidentally copied a blood clot that is slowly killing her operator, so killing the ganger. She goes from militant to potentially reasonable. Add to that, the doctor scanning and touching the reservoir of biomatter that they have causes spontaneous generation of a ganger for the doctor. And while there is some trouble with the fact that this flesh that's designed to emulate humans is now emulating a Time Lord, well, there is a bit of a moment, but eventually the Dr. Ganger stabilizes, and the two work together to try and get everyone safely off the island, which, after a bit of futzing from the gangers, is going to blow up, thanks to the acid that they're harvesting becoming extremely volatile. So there's a ticking clock. Add to that, Rory seems to bond with what he believes is the mousy girl, although turns out she's been dead a while. It was her ganger the whole time. She even made another ganger of herself to fool him into thinking she killed her ganger. And after one of the gangers is killed by one of the humans, and one of the humans is killed by one of the gangers, and one of the humans is killed by an acid bath, on his son's birthday of all days, the surviving humans and gangers who have finally convinced the surviving humans not to slaughter them, they all decide to get off the island together, because, by the way, they're on an island. Meanwhile, Rory, during his jaunt with the false mousy girl, he finds the remains of faulty gangers left to rot while conscious. It seems these pseudo clones are not treated very well. Apparently, the military thinks they're just like regular robots, and you can just chuck them in the garbage when they stop working. But it seems the flesh is evolving, because flesh tends to do that. I mean, it's basically quick-drying primordial soup. And we all know how, shall we say, finicky primordial soup can be. Unfortunately, the ganger of the mousy girl has gone full monster, because no one's willing to help her start a revolution. So she de-evolves into a kind of monster and tries to kill everybody. She does kill one guy, but the ganger of the leader of the operation and the ganger of the doctor decide to stay behind and stop her. Meanwhile, Amy, who's been experiencing stomach cramps and seeing this weird eye patch lady peeking at her from windows that shouldn't be there for the last couple of episodes, she's been shying away from the ganger doctor and glomming onto the real doctor because he is the real doctor. Actually, he's not. The doctor's shoes were accidentally dissolved by acid. So we had to get some replacements, and he decided to switch shoes with his ganger. And it was part of a test that allowed the doctor to see the gangers from a new perspective. He's been studying this flesh material for quite some time. And Amy was the last piece of the puzzle. Doctor also keeps telling Amy to breathe, like she's not breathing. She's not holding her breath or anything. But eventually, when the real doctor gets everyone aboard the TARDIS, except for Dr. Ganger and Dr. Operation Leader, who stay behind and use a sonic screwdriver to dissolve themselves and the monster flesh before the island explodes. The doctor reveals several things. Number one, the surviving gangers who witnessed their operators getting killed by either monsters or acid and embracing their humanity. Well, they're human through and through now. The TARDIS stabilized them. And the operation leader's blood clot, the doctor's got something for that. So, the former ganger whose operator has a son who has a birthday coming up this sunrise, he goes to be a dad, and the other surviving ganger and the other surviving human call a press conference to talk about how the military and other companies are abusing the flesh. And then the doctor drops a bombshell. Amy isn't Amy. He took the three of them there at that time to study the flesh in its earliest form before it was perfected. Turns out Amy's been a flesh avatar the whole time, probably since before America. So the doctor tells Amy to breathe, and then he's going to find her wherever she is, and he gets another sonic screwdriver and deactivates the flesh, which collapses. And Amy wakes up with that weird eye patch lady telling her to breathe and to push, and that she's about to pop in a very creepy tone. And the reason she's talking to Amy like that is because Amy's pregnant. Turns out the doctor's positive and negative scans of Amy's potential pregnancy were both right. The Avatar wasn't pregnant, but Amy is. And in the next episode, when a good man goes to war, she's given birth, but it's not as joyous an occasion as it should be, because she's surrounded by soldier clerics of a religion called the Papal Mainframe, whatever that is. And the one in charge, the eye patch lady, we finally get her name, Madame Colvarian. And her plan is to take Amy's baby, her daughter, who's been named Melody Pond, away. Why? We don't know yet. But the Doctor and Rory are not idle. Rory has taken up the mantle of the last Roman once again, and he's become kind of a tough guy. He storms a cyber ship from this dimension. They look like Cybermen, but without the logo on their chests, thankfully. And meanwhile, the Doctor ends up blowing up half of their cyber fleet to show the Cybermen that Rory is not someone to mess around. And after prying the information out of the heads of the Cybermen, the Doctor and Rory gather a small army. Some of them we've met, some of them we haven't met. First, we go to the late 1880s, where we meet a Silurian woman named Madame Vastra, who's just come back from eating Jack the Ripper and ending his reign of terror. Ew. And her servant, Jenny, who's also a human and also her wife. That must have been an interesting first date. And their nurse, a Sontaran named Commander Strax. Apparently he's a nurse because he was defeated in battle and it's kind of a punishment. He's actually a pretty good nurse, but less so of a soldier. But you go to the war with the army you have. Rory also goes to collect River, who has just come back from dancing on the frozen Thames River with her doctor. Unfortunately, the Doctor can't rely on River this time because it's the day he finds out who she is. And she's got to stay out of it till the end. So count her out. But we can count on that chubby blue guy that River threatened a while back. We find out his name's Dorian. And he's good with computers, apparently. And unfortunately, that's all we find out the Doctor has assembled so far. Cut to an asteroid space base, and it's called Demon's Run. And we find that the Papal Mainframe soldier clerics have turned against the Doctor and allied with an order of beings called the Headless Monks. And it turns out that's not a metaphor. They actually are headless. They put their heads in boxes and use their hearts for everything, somehow. Because apparently they believe the heart is the true driving force of the body, and the head is full of doubts. So they animate their headless bodies to act as warrior monks, with lightning powers and the ability to chant, even though they don't have mouths. And they even soup up some old school swords with their lightning abilities, so they act as pseudo lightsabers. We also meet 3 people. 3 of the soldier clerics. 2 of them, a gay couple of guys. One of whom has volunteered to join the Headless Monks, much to the later shock and chagrin of his husband. And a girl from the Gamma Forest called Lorna. I might be mispronouncing her name, but I can't afford to look it up right now. She joined the military / priesthood to meet the Doctor, whom she believes is a great warrior, fully unaware that he's just some idiot with a box who doesn't know when to look the other way. They've come together to oppose the Doctor, and they're using Amy and her baby. But turns out the Doctor has already infiltrated their ranks, and he brings down Vastra, Jenny, who's actually good with a sword, Strax, who's good with a gun, a small army of Jadoon and Silurians, and with the help of Dorian's computer skills, not to mention a squad of those Spitfighters that were souped up with Dalek technology, piloted by, among them, Danny Boy, whom we met in World War II. And even Avery shows up to help take Madame Covarian hostage. And, having a change of heart, once she sees how Amy speaks to her daughter about the Doctor, Lorna changes sides and offers to help. She informs the Doctor and company that it was a trap. The main army departs, and the Headless Monks show up because they don't show up as human anymore. And they quickly start taking down our heroes. Dorian loses his head, and his body keeps walking around. I guess their swords are designed for recruitment rather than killing. And poor Lorna, she gets zapped by a monk. And Covarian, she gets away. But what's important is, while Strax has been wounded and Dorian's walking around headless, and Lorna dies after telling the Doctor it's good to see him again, because apparently he met her when she was a kid, told her to run from something. Only I think he hasn't met her yet. She must have met a future Doctor, because when she dies, he asks who she was, and they didn't really know. Earlier, also, she gave Amy a prayer leaf that she made, containing the name of her daughter. Except she mentions that her people don't have a word for pond, because the only water in the forest, the Gamma Forest, is a river. And things click into place. Unfortunately, we find out the hard way that after the surviving heroes, including Strax, who gets mended, have won the day, basically, because they managed to defeat the monks. Turns out the Doctor was hoodwinked a second time. The first time Amy was just a flesh avatar, and when Madame Kovarian gets away, she reveals that Melody was also a flesh avatar. Switched at some point and taken away. Why? Turns out it's because Amy and Rory doinked in the TARDIS. Feel free to laugh, but this is serious. They started their honeymoon right away on board the TARDIS while flying through the time vortex, and turns out that's not a good idea. Turns out the Doctor's no hanky-panky and the TARDIS rule was for a good reason, because a human child conceived inside the TARDIS while it's in the vortex, the time vortex, potentially takes on Time Lord-like qualities, including the ability to regenerate, much like that little girl we met earlier did. So yeah, turns out that little girl in the astronaut suit who found herself regenerating in New York, that must have been Melody. But still, why would they want a human Time Lord hybrid? Turns out Kovarian has convinced the Papal Mainframe, and quite possibly the Silence, that the Doctor is too much of a threat. He has to be neutralized. So they're going to turn Melody into a weapon. But then River shows up and drops a truth bomb. She spills a secret to the Doctor that only he's aware of, because they're basically reading each other's thoughts. Or maybe it's just innuendo, I don't know. But the Doctor has River take charge of Amy and Rory and everybody else, and leaves on his own to look for Melody with a grin. Then, when Amy threatens River with a gun, she spills the beans to her too. The TARDIS translation matrix, it translates the language of the forest for Amy, and on the prayer leaf that Lorna gave her. And what's important in the language of the forest is that they don't have a word for pond, because the only water in the forest is the river. So when Amy looks at the prayer leaf for Melody Pond, what does she see? The words, River Song. Yes, River is in fact Melody Pond. She was Amy's daughter the whole time, all grown up. And apparently at some point she married the Doctor, and that's why she was able to learn his true name. But that story is for another time. Until then, this is Mr. J signing out and reminding you, the Doctor is not a good man. He's complicated. The true good man who went to war was Rory. And that's why he is awesome.